Okay, just doing a quick sound check to see whether this is working. If anyone's currently watching, if you could just pop a comment in the live chat so that I know everything's working and ready for past. And if it is, I will see you in a little under quarter of an hour. Bye. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's In Studio Live, the 92nd edition, and as you can see, I'm not broadcasting from the studio this week. That is because I'm away from home because of this. The Silverstone Half Marathon, which I ran this morning, all 13.1 miles, well, walked a little bit, not much actually. I did actually run the vast majority of it, and the little bits I did walk were only a few paces and in a few places. So I'm away from home, but still wanted to bring you a live stream this week, and so let's get a move on, shall we? And I can show you what's going on for tonight. So, right, everything's in different places tonight, so all the buttons are in the wrong places for me, but we'll carry on the best we can. Right, yeah, it is a part recorded show, simply because I haven't got the ability to do everything in a mobile setup. I'm reasonably pleased with what I have managed to achieve with it, but obviously I can't do everything. Just to say welcome to the show. If you haven't said hi in the YouTube live chat, if you can do that, that will be really helpful, and I can see who's there. So who have we got? Oh, nobody else is saying hi. Hi. So at the moment, all I know is Gary and Bob are watching, but never mind, I'll have a look later at that and see who else has joined us. Part pre-recorded, as I said, and I've actually taken two sections from two very old shows now, comparatively speaking. A section from the landscape photography show that I did way back fairly early on last year in show number 15, and giving you some advice on that. And the second part of that is on hyperfocal distance, which is a feature of landscape photography, so I've put that in there. On that, then the sections aren't particularly long, but I felt it was a good time to go over that sort of topic again, for the benefit of those who haven't been watching since the teens on this show, since we're now in the 90s. Right. Also, I've got an image feedback section. Now, I've only got the Facebook image feedback section this week. At the point when I had to do the pre-recording, that's all I'd received. I have received some since then. So, Richard, I know you've just sent me some stuff today, but I'll cover that in next week's show. I hope that's okay. In fact, I don't think you're watching live because I think you're travelling again, aren't you? So you'll catch it on the replay. And just to say, actually, folks, if you're watching this live and you don't know, these shows stay on YouTube. So if you've missed one or you want to catch up, then just have a look through my YouTube channel and you'll find the rest of the shows. Simple. And at the end, of course, I'll finish off with our image of the week. So, just the usual reminder at this stage: subscribe, like and share. If you aren't subscribed, please do so. Hit the bell icon so you get the notifications. Please hit the like button, and let's see what we've got on the likes at the moment. One. That's all we've got. One. Right, okay, not good enough. Right, go and hit the like button, folks, please. That will help things. And as ever, my appreciation to everyone who's been sharing details of this show to other folks. So thank you for that. On there. And just a reminder, if you're not a member of the Facebook group and you are not signed up for my newsletter, the links for doing both are down below. So I really encourage you to join the Facebook group because that's where we carry on the conversation during the rest of the week. I say links down below. So, landscape photography. As I said, I know many of you have only just started watching these live streams recently, and you will have missed this. So I thought the fact that I'm away, I've got relatively limited facilities for doing the the live stream, this would be a good time to enable you to catch up and see something that you may have missed. Those of you who saw it first time round, hopefully this is a good reminder of best practices and things to think about when you're doing landscape photography. And it's all from episode 15 about making better landscapes. So as they say in TV, roll VT. I'll see you at the end of the segment. So let's turn to our subject for the evening, landscape photography, and look at that. So landscapes. The first thing I want to say about landscapes, other than what's on the screen at the moment, is I wouldn't classify myself as a landscape photographer. I would call myself a travel photographer who does landscapes while traveling. I very rarely go out and do landscape stuff in the UK. Most of my landscape stuff has been done when I've been traveling, and you'll see the examples on here. I think there's about one image from the UK. The rest are from Iceland and Greenland. So I tend to do my landscape work when I'm abroad. But the thing about landscape photography is we need to remember that not every beautiful scene will make a beautiful photograph. Not every scene is great for landscape photography. And sometimes we just have to accept that we can't capture the experience that we've got, the experience that we have in that particular location. Let me try and illustrate this from my first arrival ever in Greenland. I should have been going to Greenland next month. I was booked on a cruise back to Greenland and Iceland, and I found out on Friday it's been cancelled because of COVID. Oh well. Anyway, my very first time in Greenland, we arrived at a place called Tasiilaq, and a wonderful place, except when we arrived, the conditions weren't very promising because we couldn't actually see Tasiilaq from where the ship was at anchor. The mist had come down, everything was grey, that horrible grey where you just couldn't see anything. Nevertheless, went ashore and well, things weren't terribly promising, even on going up the beautiful Valley of Flowers. That's the scene that you can see there. I mean, it's okay, but it's just not very promising. Still, I tried my best. Got some okay results on that, but nothing that would be spectacular. So I started heading back to the ship. Now, one of the things about Tasiilaq in Greenland is, this may seem strange, but one of the things it's noted for is an ice cream shop. And it's the thing to do there is you go and have an ice cream. And I've been wandering around, I thought, right, okay, I'll go and have my ice cream. And I paid for it, and I sat down on a wooden bench, eating the ice cream. And I had my back to the mist behind me. I was looking in towards the shop. I finished the ice cream and I actually stood up, packed my camera gear away, ready to walk down the hill to get the tender back to the ship. And then I turned round. And in that short period of time that I'd been sitting there with the ice cream, the mist had completely lifted. And the scene in front of me was absolutely amazing. It's one of those scenes which will stay with me forever. So I immediately got the camera out of the bag, and this is one of the shots, the first shots I took of it. And it's not particularly brilliant. To me, the experience was fantastic because of everything that had happened in the build-up to seeing the mist come up, seeing the ship, the fjord and everything like that. But it didn't translate into a great image. It was a fantastic experience, it was a fantastic view, but not a fantastic image. So we needn't beat ourselves up as photographers if we don't always come back with the most amazing image. It's better to have the amazing experience of seeing it rather than capturing it. So some hints and tips on landscape photography, and I talk about the 3 grounds for landscape photography, and those are the things I'm looking for when I'm doing landscape. I'm looking for the foreground. What's close to me? How can I put a foreground interest into an image? The midground, that a little bit further away from me, a point of interest there. And then finally, the background. Maybe it's the rolling hills behind. And the reason I look for that is because this mirrors our experience when out walking and out seeing a landscape. Because as we walk along, we should be, if we're walking, we're looking down at where we place our feet. There's, I was told many years ago when I first went to Egypt and went to the Middle East, that the golden rule is you look down when you're walking. If you want to look at the view, stop walking because the ground's uneven. And this is true for a lot of photographers as well. We should be looking down. Where are we putting our feet? So that's our foreground. And then we look up slightly and we see what's directly in front of us. And that's our midground, the trees, the streams, the gates and things like that. That's our midground. And then we look further behind it. We see the rolling hills behind that. And that's our background. So those are the 3 grounds that we're looking for when composing a good landscape image. So let's look at this as an example. This is the Holmennes Peninsula in Iceland, and you can see those 3 grounds in there. We've got the ground of the foreground of the boulders here. We've got the midground of the edge of the peninsula, and we've got the background of the sky and the opening to the fiord on there. So that's what we're looking for to create a good landscape photo. Again here, this one's in Sissimut in Greenland. We've got our 3 grounds. We've got the tussocks, the bit of grass here as our foreground. We've got the beach as our midground, and the sea and the other the scattered islands and the edge of the peninsula there as our background to it. So if you look for those 3 sections when composing an image, that will help you create a good landscape image. One of the most useful tools for landscape photography, and just to say, these are just highlight points for landscape. I'm trying to condense what is normally a 3/4 of an hour talk into about 10 minutes here. Neutral density filters. These are one of the most useful bits of kit for a landscape photographer. If you don't know what one is, it's sometimes known as an ND grad, and the top half of the filter is grey, and the bottom half is clear, and there is a transition between the 2. And the idea is that you put that transition on the horizon, and it darkens down the sky so it doesn't blow out, so you don't get blown out skies. It brings the brightness of the sky down to the brightness of the foreground. What does it look like? Move on. It looks like that. It's a piece of plastic that you put in, and the aim is to just put that transition area over the horizon. And then you get something like this. This was in Morecambe. This is the UK image, by the way. And I put that transition on the horizon, which enabled me to capture the detail in the clouds, which otherwise would have been blown out. What about panoramas? Now, I just want to briefly talk about panoramas. Sometimes trying to compress a whole scene into a single photo seems like doing it an injustice, and the answer to that is a panorama, and you can get the full sweep of what's in front of you. Now, if you're using a DSLR for it, the advice if you're going to be stitching the photos together, is to overlap by at least 1/3. So if you take a shot here, then you move along, so it's a third of the way, third of the way, third overlap, like that. And that helps you stitch the image, helps the software stitch the image better. Now, one tip for you for doing a panorama, and this is counterintuitive. If you've not done them before, think about turning your camera so that it's in vertical format when you're doing a panorama. That means you've got your longest resolution. That it just means that the final stitched image has higher resolution. It means you have to take more shots as you move around, but you get a bigger, higher resolution panorama at the end of it. Now, if you've got a compact camera or an iPhone, quite often it's a case of press, hold and pan with it. Now, I want to give you a tip with anything to do with panning or doing panoramas like that. And I'm trying to think of the best way to illustrate this, because I normally need to stand up to do it and you need to be able to see my feet. And with the best will in the world, you are not going to be able to see my feet with the setup I've got here at the studio. So what you need to do is you need to work out where you're going to finish on the panorama. So for example, I'll try and do it with the chair rather than the feet. So if I want to finish my pan over here, I point myself over towards there, but then I twist my body round and start there. So as I'm panning, I'm moving back in line with myself, and you'll get a smoother transition like that. If you try doing it the other way, you'll see it is a bit more jerky. And that's a good tip if you're doing the other type of photography panning, where you're panning to track a subject, to do it that way. But when doing any form of panorama where you're stitching together or you're moving a camera while you press down to capture a panorama, that will give you a far better results by using that little tip. Just want to talk about people and landscapes. We tend to think of landscapes as being something without people in them. But people can be really useful in landscape photography. And I want to give, I think it's 3 different examples of how that might work. Maybe it's 4, can't remember. We'll see what comes up on the screen. The first one is the idea of using people to give scale to your images. With this image of Gullfoss waterfall in Iceland, you'd have no idea of whether it's a small waterfall or a big waterfall if it wasn't for the people in the shot. So that gives that sense of scale to what you're photographing, when scale is important. Another use of people is like this shot in Kangerlussuaq in Greenland, and they can become a frame for the image. By putting a photographer on the edge of it, that frames and draws the viewer into the image. So it's a great framing construct for landscape photography. And they can be your foreground interest. If you haven't got anything else as foreground interest, now this isn't the best shot in the world, but use a person as the foreground interest. So that acts as the thing that drives you into the image. One way of using that even more is to use them as effectively your proxy. And here we are at Russell Glacier again in Greenland. I think it was near that's Kangerlussuaq as well, that sort of area. And the person in there becomes the proxy for the viewer. So we are seeing what they are seeing, and it helps personalize the image that we're creating. So again, another suggestion for you with landscape photography and using people in that. Now, there is one thing that I want to just mention here about landscape photography. We often talk about images which are taken vertically as being landscape, because most landscapes are taken in horizontally. Landscapes are normally taken horizontally, and we talk about them being landscape format. And similarly, portraits of people which are taken vertically, we often refer to as being portrait format. But there is no reason why a great landscape has to be landscape format. It can be portrait format. Or better still, let's just drop landscape and portrait as our labels for these, and let's just refer to them as horizontal and vertical. Think about using vertical format for landscapes. So here, back to the Holmanes Peninsula, and you can see how a vertical format has worked for that. It brings us in. We've got little bits of uneven ground on the foreground as we go in to see the background of the mountains. And another example, back to Tasiilaq, and back to that scene when the mist came up. Vertical format here. Now this is a better shot than the one I showed earlier. And notice we've gone full circle. We've gone back to that first shot, but we've got our three grounds in there. We've got the rock in the foreground, we've got the buildings in the midground, we've got the mountain and the mist in the background there. And not only that, we've changed the format of it so that it's vertical to make it stand out from a standard landscape shot. Okay, so we're back. I hope you found that helpful. I hope it was a good refresher if you'd seen it before, or if you hadn't seen it, that it is helpful to you. So, not a lot of activity in chat at the moment. We've got a few people in there. No questions coming in at present on that. So, we'll just carry on. And at this point, I'm going to do my usual thank you to the sponsors of this live stream, which is, of course, yourselves. And if you want to try and, if you want to say thank you for the live streams and want to try and keep them on, keep them going, then there is a link down below. There it is on the screen that way. Everything's in a different position where you can buy me a cup of tea. I normally have a name on the mug each week. Well, I'm not staying at home, so I can't write on this mug. But my thanks goes to David Wayne for today's cuppa. Cheers, David, if you're watching. So, connected with landscape photography is this idea of hyperfocal distance. And this is something I talked about in the following live stream, after the one you've just watched that section from. It's only a short section. It's about 5-10, it's not 10 minutes. I think it's about 5 minutes, 7 minutes, something like that, about the technique of using hyperfocal distance to maximize your depth of field. So, as they say in TV, roll VT. So what is hyperfocal distance? Hyperfocal distance is the position you need to focus at to maximize your depth of field when you are doing landscape photography. Now, a little bit of background to this. I'm sure most of you already know this, but if you are photographing something, you focus on a point. It's a single item, but you have a depth of field where a certain distance behind the point and a certain distance in front of it are still in acceptable focus. And whilst we tend to think it's half and half, it isn't. It's actually 2/3 of your depth of field is behind where you focus. 2/3 of it. So, for example, if I had settings which gave me a depth of field that was 3 meters, and I focused on a particular object, then 1 meter in front of it, towards me as the photographer, would be in acceptable focus, but 2 meters behind it would be in acceptable focus. So, what happens when we focus on infinity? You can't have anything beyond infinity. So you are actually throwing away 2/3 of your depth of field if you focus at infinity. Now, most landscape photographers want to get the majority of their scene in sharp focus. That means when you're doing landscape photography, you do not focus on the mountains in the distance, because if you do, you throw away that 2/3 of your depth of field. Most landscape photographers are already working at small apertures to maximize the depth of field. So by using this hyperfocal distance, you can maximize it even more. It gives you effectively 3 times the depth of field that you would get if compared to focusing on infinity. So what does it look like? How do we see this hyperfocal distance? Well, in years gone by, that's what a lens used to look like. Now, so I can get my mouse over here. Yeah, we would have this scale on the lens, and this is a depth of field scale. So in the example that we've got here, if I was shooting at f/22 on this with this lens, everything from infinity down to, well, just a little over 0.7 of a meter would be in acceptable focus. Because, but as you can see, the lens is currently set to f11. So actually, in this example, for f11, if I focus the distance it's focused at, everything between 2 meters and 1 meter. Actually, is that meters or feet? Yeah, no, that's meters. 2 meters and 1 meter is in acceptable focus. So the key is to use if you've got a lens which has this, you set infinity to what aperture you're shooting at, and that tells you, well, that's the focusing that you need to do for it. You set it, you focus with the infinity on the aperture setting. Now, unfortunately, the majority of lenses no longer have that scale on them. So what do we do? Well, we have 2 options, really. Well, 3. There is a third. I'm going to talk about a third. It's the cheats option. The first option is you go to a website called dofmaster.com, and there are various tables in there that you can download. You can put in the details of your lenses, you can put in all the information about your camera, your sensor size and things like that, and you can download a table that will work for your camera, and you can keep that in your camera bag. So you can do that. Or you can use an app for it. And the one I recommend is called The Photographer's Friend by a chap called Martin Bailey. Now, Martin Bailey is, I want to refer to him as a British photographer living in Japan, but actually he's not. He's taken Japanese nationality, so he is now a Japanese photographer living in Japan, but he was born in the UK of English heritage, of British heritage. And he is an absolutely brilliant wildlife photographer, landscape photographer, does a fantastic weekly podcast, runs tours and things like that. And he has this app and it's really powerful. I'm not going to go into how you use it on here. It's fairly self-explanatory. You put in your sensor size, you put in the aperture you're shooting at, you put in the either the distance you are focusing at and it will tell you the depth of field, or you put in to say that you want to shoot at infinity, you want the hyperfocal distance, and it will tell you what the distance is you have to actually focus at to make sure everything from in front, a certain distance in front of it all the way through to infinity is actually in focus. So look that one up. He did an updated version of it fairly recently. I think my screen grab is of the older version. So definitely have a look at that on there. The couple of other cheats on there. One is, if you can't be bothered to look everything up, what I tend to do is I tend to focus between 1/3 to 2/3 of the way into the scene at a small aperture. And I know from experience that typically my hyperfocal distance for most of the things I'm trying to do is going to be okay on that. So I just focus a little way into the scene to try and maximize that. Alternatively, if your camera has got a depth of field preview button, you can check that you've got everything that you need in sharp depth of field is in focus. Sharp depth of field? Sharp focus is in focus. So you can do that. The only problem with that is when you're working at very small apertures and you press that button, everything goes completely black. So just be aware of that. And it may be very difficult for you to see it. The other thing to be aware of, if you've got a Canon camera, for most of the Canon cameras, that button is unmarked. It's one of those black buttons on the side of your camera. The trouble is, on the opposite side, there is another black unmarked button, which is actually the one you press to release your lens. So if you're messing around with this out in the field, do make sure you press the right button, and don't blame me if your lens falls off when you're trying to check your depth of field on there. So those are a couple of other ways of getting that hyperfocal distance. Okay, so again, I hope that helped. It's a slightly more advanced technique. Maybe you've not come across it before. Hopefully you found that helpful. Moving on. Our feedback section tonight. I've got images from quite a few people. I think most of the people are going to be watching on playback on this tonight. So hopefully you find it helpful as I go through this. So I've pre-recorded this. So let's head over to Lightroom and I can show you the feedback section. So here we are in Lightroom to have a look at this week's Facebook images. And the first image on the list is from Anthony Barker. So let me go full screen on this. This is a church in the, I believe in the sort of Norwich area. Now, the immediate thing about this is all those converging verticals. I'm not a big fan of converging verticals unless they are there for an effect. Now, this is quite tight in. Now, I don't know whether you were able to get any further back from the church on here with it, but if you could have got just a little bit further back and got the bottom in over in this area, then there's things we could have done to sort out the verticals on that. Exposure wise, it's good. Don't know what camera you're using. I know you do often shoot with a phone. I don't know if this was with a phone camera or not. Aspect ratio doesn't look quite right for a phone camera. I'm guessing it might be your bridge camera, but I'm not sure. Facebook doesn't give me that kind of information, I'm afraid. Right, let's see what we can do with this. I'll go into the develop module. And we're going to just try and sort out a few bits and pieces with those converging verticals. Now, if I go into transform, now rather than using this top section up here, which will allow me to automatically try and correct, and if I just do auto, you see it does a reasonable job on it, but when we come to crop, we've got a problem that we have to come in so close on there and so close on there. So that is one possible thing, but that really does look a little bit odd down there. So I'm just going to undo that, Control Z, Control Z, and instead what I'm going to do is let's come out of the crop tool. I'm going to manually do this, and I'm just going to go vertical on it just a little bit, and I'm just trying to ease those converging verticals, and a little bit of Y offset to bring it down. Whoops, down to about there, and then I can just go a little bit more. Now, if I do the crop, because I've not come in quite as much, I think we get away with it just a fraction better on that. It's still a bit close down there, but I think that works a little bit better. The alternative with something like this is if I completely reset this, and let's make a feature of these converging verticals. And I'm going to do that by using the crop. And I'm actually going to make that tilt even more than we had before. So we've got something looking like that. And that makes it look as though you intended to have that, that angle to the tower on there. So that's another possibility. The third option, again, I will reset this, is if you could have come much further back so that you didn't have to tilt the camera up. Converging verticals are caused by tilting the camera up. So by coming back, you don't have to tilt it as far. Therefore, it doesn't give you that that effect. Okay, moving on. Another one of Anthony's images here, which is a sunset. Now this does look like it's a phone image. I think with this, I like the colours on it. I like the idea of the silhouette in the background. A couple of little bits and pieces. First of all, we've got this little bit of sensor dust, I guess, on there. That's easily solved. Q and spot removal tool. Now, with a composition like this, it's nice to have that little bit of foreground in front of the sunset. And I think you've done well to try and find something like that. The trees in there, but it's not the most interesting of foregrounds. Excuse me. What would have been a little bit more interesting might be, I don't know, I'm guessing you're out in the countryside somewhere with that. If you could have found a stile and a signpost, something like that, which would give a more interesting silhouette, maybe a person standing looking at the sunset, that type of thing I think works better. Having said all that, something like this would work nicely as maybe a banner on Facebook. So you could have your avatar down in this corner. You've got that as a nice background. Anything that you need to put text over, words for songs, that sort of thing. It would work great with that. But I think it's all about what the purpose is. As a standalone image, it needs a point of interest. When we look at an image, our eye tries to find that single point of interest, and I can't find it in here. There's no one thing sort of drawing the eye with it. So good image, good exposure, good colour, but I think the silhouette in the foreground, try and find something a little bit more interesting on there. Just to say also, Anthony, and I don't know whether you're doing this on your phone, editing on there. If you are, Snapseed is a good tool to use for that. Okay, moving along. Now we're on to Richard Lovelock's image, and this is Trevi Fountain in Rome. I recognise this one. I would say, Richard, you're a fraction late on the blue hour. Just right at the top end of it. It's starting to get a bit dark there and a bit blown out here. So you're just at the limits of your dynamic range now on this. It's a good shot. You've corrected the verticals. I'm still not convinced there isn't a pincushion effect. So I'm going to go, and if I go in here for the crop and just go through the overlays, I can have a look and see. And at the moment, that is looking as though no, there's something odd. We appear to have got a vertical correct there and there, but in the middle, they are coming out. If you look at, which line is it? Oh, I don't know. This is an optical illusion, surely. There's something weird going on here, that the lines are telling me that it's more or less straight, but yet my eye is saying it's bent. There's an optical illusion with that, and I can't quite fathom what's going on. I am going to go and use guided on here. So I want to draw some lines now and try and find out for sure. And I think, I don't know, that does look right, but if I do the same from there across here, well, it has done a little bit of correction, and I'm going to draw a line down there. It did, it brought it out a little bit, so it's not quite true. And on there, yes. So there. I'm still not convinced there's not some pincushion distortion going on with it, with that. So, I mean, lens correction, manual, and distortion. It just feels better if I just give it that much on there. That, to me, looks a little bit better with that distortion. How weird is that? Right, I don't have an explanation for that one. It is a nice shot. I would just say just that perhaps a fraction too late on the blue hour. You can counteract some of it by just upping the exposure a fraction to get the sky to that nice blue, and then I would bring the highlights down to try and preserve what we can. Now that would work better with your raw file, maybe just a touch more clarity, and I'd probably go with something like that. So before and after. Yeah, you see there is just that slight change to it. Again, that's personal preference. I know you possibly wanted the slightly darker version, but that's what I would do with that. Now, I love this. The two nuns having some ice cream in Rome. I think it works well. I think it's just a fraction on the dark side, so I'm going to lighten it up a little bit, which means I have to bring the highlights down to prevent things blowing out. I think that works a little bit better. Now, I did say I wonder whether this will work better as a black and white. So I'm going to try and do a black and white conversion. So there. Now that works nicely, but the faces are a little bit dark, so we do need to dodge those and lighten them up. And the way I'm going to do this, the adjustment brush K, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the exposure and bring it up quite a little bit on there. I'm going to keep the flow quite low, highly feathered, and yeah, about that sort of size. So I can now start painting on, and the more I move the brush, the lighter it gets. So I can make it a little bit more natural looking by doing that. You see how I'm just sort of bringing it in, and I can just keep bringing things in that need that extra little bit of light, maybe a fraction around the feet, and with this nun, just a little bit on round the face, and maybe around her bag, like that. So I would go something like that. Now, come out from the adjustment brush K, I'd possibly bring the clarity up a little bit, and maybe just a fraction on texture with it. So I go with something like that. Does it need a vignette? Well, let's have a look using my presets and just step through them to see which works best. And I think that particular one works nicely with it. So I would go with something like that. So there's before and after. So yeah, a black and white conversion does work with it. Moving along, John Barton, another one of your drone shots. You made the right decision on cutting out the sun and the bright sky, so that we just concentrate on this beam of light. Now, again, as I've said previously, this is where we're hitting the restrictions on small camera sensors. There's a bit of noise in there. I mean, there's nothing much you can do about it, but we are hitting those restrictions. I would bring the exposure up just a little bit and the highlights down just a little bit on there. Maybe then just bring the shadows up on something like that, and a little bit on the clarity, maybe a little bit dehaze. So I'd end up with something looking like that. So before, after, and it just lifts the foreground on there. Like where you've got the horizon in there. So yeah, good job. Again, another one, and again, we've hit the limitations here of the sensor. You can see the blotchiness in the foreground on there. Difficult to know where the camera is actually focused on this. I'm finding my eye drawn to the brighter skies. Now, I like the composition. I would have probably removed this one twig from here. Now, again, I don't know that you could do it with the camera you've got. I would have done separate exposures on this, put the camera on a tripod, low level, and made sure that the sky wasn't blown out, because that's, I think you've tried to pull some of it back on there, or the camera has, but it is pure white, and I'm sure there'll be some detail in there that you could use. So think about an HDR. Again, take your big camera with you for that. This one, right, darts player, focusing. If we zoom in, we can see the eyes are soft on here, but yet the logo is sharp. So love the composition and the light coming through, the framing and all that. But just a couple of things to watch. Focus on the eyes, not on there. That might mean you need a single point of focus to be able to do it, and you need to direct it at the eyes, because at the moment the face is soft, the logo is sharp on that one. Right, Andy, nice shot. I noticed you said about how hard doing woodland shots can be, and I don't think you've done a bad job on here. I think it lacks a little bit of a point of interest. I think you're trying for this to be your point of interest, the one that's illuminated by the sun. I like the fact that the sky is not blown out. I suspect you've HDR'd this to get that. If that is our point of interest, our subject, right down the middle, I'd like to have seen it off to one side. Now, on your video, you were talking, I can't remember whether it was this image or another, about having something on the right-hand side that you cropped out. I think I'd like to see this a little bit off to one side. I don't know whether it can be done on here to do something like that. But I actually find that more pleasing, because that feels as though these are edges on a path or something leading me more into the forest on the image there. Also, this is very bright. I'd like to see that just brought down a bit, and I don't know that I can do it on the sliders, because it looks as though it might have been blown out in the original, and that I haven't got the scope because as I bring it down, there's no detail to be found in there. You see, I'm just getting that colour shift with it rather than getting any more detail brought back. It is an interesting shot. I think you were right, as you said on your video, it needs a couple more weeks to get the golden colours, and I think having a bit more of a golden colour in this forest would have made the images that much better. But I prefer this, where it's now formed a path in. If I reset the crop, that doesn't look like we've got a path. The eye's immediately drawn to there, whereas before, with the crop I did, it looks as though there's a lead into something, and so I would go with something like that with it. But thank you for sharing it, and thank you for sharing the link to the video as well. Sonia, a dog wrapped up for winter in a crocheted blanket. There's something about this I quite like. I know it's a bit of a snap, but I think a tighter crop with this. What I don't like is this area up here. It's a bit distracting. I would have just moved the camera over a little bit, so I have to put the dog on the right hand side. So if we were to do, say, something like that with it, that I think is a much more interesting shot, where it's just the dog and the blanket and the cushion on there without those distracting factors in the image. So have a look at something like that. Possibly a little bit of clarity, could do a little bit of sharpening on there. And that is it for this week's crop of images. So thank you everyone for submitting those. Keep posting your images to Facebook, and I'll have some more next week to go through. Right, so back here we are. Now it just leaves me the job of revealing this week's member photo of the week, and this week I have chosen the one we were just looking at, the dog in the blanket by Sonia. So thank you for that. And using the sort of crop I've just described, that is how it will appear on the website when I upload it, which I will do very shortly on there. So last look at chat. Andy saying that he agrees with the crop that I'd suggested on his image on there. So nice to know that. Thank you, Andy. And that brings us more or less to the end of this week's episode. So next Sunday, what am I going to do next Sunday? I will be back in the studio, all goes to plan, and I'm going to be looking at image sharpening techniques, and that will include everything you need to know about, that will include why we need to do sharpening in our images, a little bit of the background to it, and the aim is I'm going to look at frequency separation and do a little bit of a tutorial on that. So join me next Sunday. Oh, excuse me. If you've got any images you'd like me to give feedback on, email them to feedback@ians-studio.co.uk, and I will look at those next week. And of course, keep posting your images to the Facebook group, from which I will choose the member photo of the week for next week. So until then, thanks for watching, folks, and I'm glad I managed to get through this in a non-standard location with my mobile setup. So thank you all, and until next time, keep making great photos. Bye for now.